The hardest oath I ever swore wasn't to tell the truth. It was to survive it. My right hand trembled above the Bible as the courtroom clerk waited for my answer. Every seat behind me was filled. Reporters leaned forward with notebooks ready. Camera flashes flickered beyond the courtroom doors before the bailiff forced them back. Somewhere across the room, 12 jurors watched me with quiet curiosity, unaware that the next few minutes could destroy a man they had spent 6 weeks calling a monster. I drew one slow breath. The polished oak walls smelled faintly of old paper and furniture polish. The air conditioning hummed softly above us, but it couldn't cool the heat pressing against my skin. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" the clerk asked again. My eyes drifted toward the defense table before I could stop them. Adrian Romano sat perfectly still in a charcoal suit that looked as flawless as every headline had claimed. He wasn't wearing handcuffs. He didn't need them. The weight he carried wasn't made of steel. It lived somewhere deeper, somewhere behind those calm gray-blue eyes that refused to ask me for anything. 8 months ago, I would have crossed the street to avoid a man like him. 8 months ago, his name belonged on the evening news beside words like organized crime, federal investigation, and dangerous empire. 8 months ago, if someone had told me that my heartbeat would someday depend on whether Adrian Romano walked out of this courtroom a free man, I would have laughed. Now I couldn't even remember what my life had looked like before he entered it. The prosecutor cleared his throat. "Ms. Bennett?" I realized everyone was waiting. My mouth felt dry. I swallowed carefully before speaking. "I do." 3 simple words. They echoed through the silent courtroom louder than I expected. Adrian finally looked at me. No pleading. No anger. No fear. Just the same quiet expression he wore the night everything changed. The look of a man who had already accepted whatever came next. That somehow hurt more than if he had begged me to save him. I lowered myself into the witness chair, my pulse hammering so loudly I barely heard the judge's instructions. My fingers tightened around the wooden armrest until my knuckles turned white. This wasn't where our story had started. It hadn't started with lawyers, federal agents, or television cameras waiting outside the courthouse. It had started beneath cold fluorescent lights, with the smell of antiseptic filling the emergency department during another exhausting overnight shift. I had been counting the minutes until sunrise, wondering whether my aging Honda would survive another drive home, wondering if my student loan payment would clear before my checking account emptied. I thought my biggest problem was being 32 minutes behind on patient charts. Then the ambulance doors opened. I looked up expecting another ordinary emergency. Instead, fate quietly walked through those sliding doors, and without realizing it, I took the first step toward putting my own heart on trial. I had worked enough night shifts at Mercy General to believe nothing could surprise me anymore. Exhaustion had a way of making every emergency look the same after a while. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with disinfectant. The constant rhythm of monitors. The squeak of rubber saws across polished floors. At 2:15 in the morning, the emergency department existed in its own strange universe where time stretched and every face carried the same tired expression. I glanced at the clock above the nurse's station while finishing another patient chart. 45 more minutes until shift change. My shoulders ached from 12 straight hours on my feet, and all I could think about was the long drive back to my apartment and the leftover soup waiting in my refrigerator. My phone buzzed with another reminder about my student loan payment, and I dismissed the notification without reading it. Financial stress could wait until after sleep. A sharp tone echoed through the hallway as the ambulance entrance opened. Everyone looked up automatically. The paramedics moved quickly but calmly, rolling a stretcher through the double doors with practiced precision. The patient was covered by a thermal blanket, his face pale beneath the bright fluorescent lights. One paramedic gave a rapid report while we walked beside the stretcher. Adult male. Estimated early 30s. Single vehicle collision reported outside the city. Mild concussion suspected. Significant blood loss before first responders arrived. Stable airway. Blood pressure improving after fluids. Unknown identity. No wallet. No phone. No family contacted. Dr. Patel nodded while pulling on fresh gloves. Trauma room 3. Full imaging. Laboratory work. Let us move. I reached for the intravenous line to confirm it was flowing correctly while another nurse connected portable monitors. The man's breathing remained slow but steady. A faint scar crossed one eyebrow, old enough to have faded into the shape of his face. His dark hair was damp from rain, and despite everything that had happened, there was something strangely composed about him, as though even unconscious he refused to surrender control. We transferred him onto the hospital bed. His expensive watch had already been removed and placed into a clear evidence bag, but I noticed the tan line beneath it. Someone who wore the same watch every day. Someone who valued routine. His hands caught my attention next. They were not the hands of an office executive. Small scars crossed his knuckles. Calluses rested along his palms. Whatever his profession was, it demanded more than boardroom meetings. Dr. Patel reviewed the scans while I checked the monitor readings once more. Heart rhythm normal. Oxygen level climbing. Blood pressure finally stabilizing. Good. Very good. The emergency department slowly settled back into its usual rhythm. Another ambulance arrived across the hall. Someone laughed near the nurse's station. A janitor quietly polished the hallway floor. Ordinary sounds returned as though nothing remarkable had happened. I updated the electronic chart and reached to adjust the blanket covering the patient. That was when his hand closed gently around my wrist. Not aggressively. Not desperately. Just firmly enough to stop me from walking away. His eyes opened slowly, clear despite the medication. They settled directly on mine with an intensity that made the noise around us disappear. He did not ask where he was. He did not ask what had happened. His first words came in a calm voice that barely rose above a whisper. You stayed. Before I could answer, several men in dark tailored suits appeared outside the glass doors at exactly the same moment, moving with quiet discipline instead of panic. None of them wore hospital badges, yet every employee instinctively stepped aside as they approached, and for reasons I could not explain, I suddenly understood that the stranger lying before me was not an ordinary patient at all. The room became unnaturally quiet as the men stopped outside the glass doors. They were dressed almost identically in dark tailored suits with neatly folded pocket squares and polished shoes untouched by the rain outside. None of them spoke. None of them rushed toward the bed. They simply waited. That silence unsettled me far more than panic ever could. I looked toward Dr. Patel, expecting him to ask security to remove them, but instead he gave a small nod and quietly stepped into the hallway. Their conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. No raised voices. No arguments. Just calm expressions and brief eye contact before Dr. Patel returned. Claire, he said gently, finish your assessment. I will handle the visitors. I nodded, although curiosity tugged at every thought in my mind. The patient had released my wrist the moment he realized I was not leaving. He rested against the pillow, studying the ceiling as though he had memorized every crack in the white tiles above him. His heartbeat remained steady on the monitor beside the bed. I checked his blood pressure one more time and adjusted the intravenous line. You should be resting, I said quietly. His eyes shifted toward me again. They were an unusual shade of gray-blue, calm enough to make it difficult to guess what he was thinking. What is your name? I asked while updating the chart. He hesitated only briefly. Adrian. No last name. Patients often protected their privacy, so I did not push. Well, Adrian, you were fortunate tonight. You need sleep more than conversation. For the first time, I caught the faintest hint of a smile. It was almost invisible, disappearing before I could decide whether I had imagined it. You sound like my grandmother, he replied softly. I laughed before I could stop myself. I will accept that as a compliment. Something changed in his expression then. Not amusement exactly. Relief. Like hearing an ordinary laugh reminded him that normal life still existed somewhere beyond these hospital walls. A gentle knock interrupted us. One of the suited men stepped inside carrying a simple paper bag from the hospital cafeteria. He placed it on the counter without saying a word. "You should eat," he told Adrian respectfully. "You have not eaten since yesterday afternoon." Adrian nodded once. "Thank you, Vincent." The man acknowledged him with another small nod before leaving as quietly as he had entered. I stared after him. There had been no fear in Vincent's voice. Only loyalty. Genuine respect. I had seen families argue over medical decisions. I had seen wealthy executives order assistants around without even learning their names. This felt different. Whatever relationship existed between those men, it was built on trust instead of obligation. Adrian noticed my expression. "They worry too much. They seem very devoted." His gaze drifted toward the closed door. "They have reasons." Before I could ask another question, a small voice echoed from the hallway. "Is he awake?" The words belonged to a little boy no older than 7. A nurse gently guided him into the room while holding his hand. The child had dark brown hair that refused to stay combed and wide gray-blue eyes that matched Adrian's almost perfectly. The moment Adrian saw him, every trace of tension disappeared from his face. His shoulders relaxed. The guarded look vanished completely. He smiled, not politely, not carefully, but with the effortless warmth of someone seeing the most important person in his world. The little boy hurried to the bedside and wrapped both arms around him. Adrian hugged him with remarkable tenderness, careful of the medical equipment, whispering, "I promised you I would come home, did I not?" In that single moment, every frightening story my imagination had invented about the mysterious stranger began to fall apart. The little boy refused to let go of Adrian's hand even after I finished checking his vital signs. He stood beside the hospital bed with complete confidence, as though the machines, the nurses, and the unfamiliar room did not exist. He looked up at Adrian with the kind of unquestioning trust that only children could give. "I told Uncle Vincent you would wake up," he said proudly. "I knew you would." Adrian smiled again, softer this time. "You were right, Noah. You usually are." Noah. I quietly added the name to my memory even though it was not part of any medical record. The child climbed carefully into the chair beside the bed, pulling a backpack onto his lap. "I brought your book," he announced. "You forgot to finish chapter 7. Adrian let out a quiet laugh that sounded surprisingly ordinary. "Did I really?" Noah nodded seriously before pulling out a well-worn hardcover copy of Treasure Island. Several pages were folded at the corners, and colorful sticky notes peeked out from between the chapters. "You promised we would finish it together." Adrian looked toward me almost apologetically. He does not let me break promises. "Good," I answered while recording another blood pressure reading. "Someone should keep patients accountable." Noah grinned at me. "He never listens when he is working." "I heard that," Adrian replied. "You were supposed to," Noah answered with complete confidence. Their conversation felt so natural that I briefly forgot I was standing inside a trauma room. Nothing about the exchange matched the intimidating picture I had unconsciously painted only minutes earlier. The expensive suits outside the door, the disciplined visitors, the mysterious arrival, all of it suddenly competed with the simple image of a man discussing pirate stories with a little boy. "Are you the nurse who helped him?" Noah asked, turning toward me. "I was part of the team." He frowned immediately. "No. Uncle Vincent said you stayed with him the whole time." My cheeks warmed unexpectedly. "That is what nurses do." Noah considered my answer for a moment before reaching into his backpack again. He pulled out a slightly crushed chocolate chip granola bar and held it toward me with both hands. "Then you forgot breakfast too." I blinked in surprise. "What makes you think that?" "Because you look tired. Aunt Lily says tired people forget to eat." I laughed softly. "Your aunt sounds very wise." Adrian watched the exchange without saying a word, but something thoughtful settled across his face. I accepted the granola bar with a grateful smile. "Thank you, Noah." "You are welcome," he replied proudly before opening his own snack. For several quiet minutes, the room felt less like an emergency department and more like a family living room interrupted by medical equipment. The peaceful moment ended when my pager vibrated. Another patient needed assistance 2 rooms away. Duty always arrived before comfort. I closed Adrian's chart and adjusted the blanket one final time. "Someone else will be checking on you soon," I said. "Try to get some sleep." Adrian gave a small nod. "Claire." Hearing my name made me pause halfway to the door. I had never introduced myself. "How did you know my name?" His eyes shifted toward the identification badge clipped to my scrubs, and for a second I felt embarrassed by my own suspicion. "I read quickly," he answered calmly. I smiled at myself and shook my head. "Fair enough." As I stepped into the hallway, Vincent was waiting beside the window. "Miss Bennett." His tone remained respectful. "Thank you for taking care of him." "He is my patient," I replied. "I would do the same for anyone." Vincent studied me for a brief moment before answering quietly. "Most people say that. Very few actually mean it." Before I could respond, he walked away, leaving me standing beneath the bright hallway lights with a strange feeling that my ordinary life had just crossed paths with something far larger than I could possibly understand. By the time my shift finally ended, the first pale streaks of sunrise had begun to color the sky beyond the hospital parking garage. My body felt twice as heavy as it had 12 hours earlier. I slipped into my aging Honda, tossed my lunch bag onto the passenger seat, and rested both hands on the steering wheel without starting the engine. Usually, after a long shift, my mind replayed medication schedules or unfinished paperwork. That morning, all I could think about was the stranger in room 3 and the little boy who believed without question that he would always come home. I drove through nearly empty streets while soft morning light reflected off rain-soaked sidewalks. Downtown looked peaceful before the city fully awakened. Coffee shops were unlocking their doors. Delivery trucks lined the curbs. Joggers crossed intersections wearing bright running jackets, completely unaware that only a few miles away an ordinary nurse was trying to make sense of a patient who did not fit any category she understood. After 4 hours of restless sleep, I woke to my phone vibrating across the nightstand. It was Emily, another nurse from my unit. "Please tell me you are awake," she said the moment I answered. "Barely. Turn on the news." Her voice carried an urgency that instantly erased the remaining traces of sleep. I reached for the television remote and switched on the local morning broadcast. The anchor stood outside a federal courthouse, speaking about a business leader whose charitable foundation had donated millions to hospitals, schools, and children's programs across the state. A photograph appeared beside her. The coffee mug nearly slipped from my hand. It was Adrian. The same calm gray-blue eyes. The same composed expression. The caption beneath the image read, "Adrian Romano, Chief Executive Officer of Romano Holdings." Before I could fully process the report, the story shifted. Another commentator mentioned long-standing federal investigations into organized crime connections that had never resulted in criminal convictions. The words seemed strangely disconnected from the man who had spent the previous night reading Treasure Island with a little boy. Wealthy businessman. Suspected criminal. Generous philanthropist. Dangerous figure. Loving guardian. None of those pieces fit together. They collided instead, leaving me with more questions than answers. I muted the television and stared at the frozen image on the screen. It was remarkable how easily headlines transformed a human being into a symbol. Watching the report, I realized I knew almost nothing about Adrian Romano beyond what I had personally witnessed. Everything else came from strangers speaking confidently through cameras. My thoughts drifted back to Noah offering me his granola bar because I looked tired. Children rarely misjudged character. They sensed safety in ways adults often forgot. My phone buzzed again. This time it was the hospital. Staffing shortage. Could I cover another evening shift? I almost declined. My apartment desperately needed cleaning. Laundry covered half the bedroom floor, and I had promised myself a quiet evening with takeout and uninterrupted sleep. Instead, I heard myself answer, "I will be there in an hour." As I walked back through the familiar hospital entrance that evening, I told myself it was simply another shift. Another collection of patients. Another ordinary day. Yet somewhere deep inside, I already suspected that room 3 had quietly changed the direction of my life, even if I still had no idea how far that change would eventually carry me. Room 3 was no longer listed on my assignment board when I arrived, and I told myself I was relieved. Professional distance was healthy. Patients came and went every day, and carrying them home in my thoughts only made this job harder. I tied my hair into a neat ponytail, clipped my identification badge onto my scrubs, and accepted my patient list from the charge nurse. Before I could finish reading it, Dr. Patel appeared beside the station holding a tablet. "Claire, I need a favor." I looked up. "What happened?" "Mr. Romano requested that you perform his discharge assessment." I blinked. "Specifically me?" Dr. Patel nodded with a small smile. "Apparently he trusts you." I almost laughed. Trust was a strange word to use after knowing someone for less than 24 hours. Still, hospital policy allowed patients to request caregivers when scheduling permitted, and tonight it did. I found him sitting beside the window instead of lying in bed. The evening sun painted long streaks of orange across the polished floor while Noah sat nearby coloring a picture of a sailboat with remarkable concentration. Adrian looked healthier than he had the night before, though faint shadows still rested beneath his eyes. He stood carefully as I entered. "Good evening, Claire." "You are supposed to let the patient impress the nurse by following instructions," I replied while opening his chart. "Standing too quickly does not help your case." A quiet smile crossed his face as he sat again without argument. Noah looked up from his coloring book. I told him the same thing. "Then we make an excellent medical team," I answered. Noah beamed with obvious satisfaction. I completed the examination carefully, checking his reflexes, vision, balance, and vital signs. Everything looked encouraging. "You are healing well," I said. "But you still need several days of rest." Adrian folded his hands calmly. "I have meetings." "Your body does not care about your meetings." Noah giggled. "She sounds like grandma again." Adrian sighed with exaggerated defeat. "Apparently everyone has formed an alliance against me." "It is called common sense," I replied, unable to hide my smile. The room filled with comfortable silence for a few moments. Noah continued coloring while I finished entering notes into the electronic chart. Then Adrian spoke again, his voice quieter than before. "May I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you become a nurse?" The question caught me off guard. Most patients wanted to discuss medication schedules or discharge paperwork, not personal history. I hesitated before answering honestly. "Because when my father became sick, one nurse treated him like a person instead of another chart." I never forgot that. Adrian nodded slowly, absorbing every word. "Kindness leaves a longer legacy than people realize." His response lingered with me. It did not sound rehearsed or philosophical. It sounded earned. Before I could reply, someone knocked gently on the open door. A woman in an elegant navy suit stepped inside carrying a leather folder. "Mr. Romano," she said respectfully. "Your vehicle is ready, and tomorrow's schedule has been cleared." She noticed me and smiled warmly. "You must be Claire." "I am Lily." Noah immediately ran toward her. "She ate my granola bar." Lily laughed softly. "Then I already know I like her." Adrian accepted the folder but did not open it. Instead, he looked toward me once more. "Thank you for reminding me that recovery is sometimes more important than responsibility." I gathered my tablet, thinking the conversation had ended. As I reached the doorway, Lily spoke almost absent-mindedly while organizing the paperwork. The board meeting can wait. The foundation gala next week cannot. The children's hospital depends on it. I paused for only a fraction of a second before continuing into the hallway, but those words echoed in my mind long after the automatic doors closed behind me, because they sounded nothing like the story the television had told the night before. The rest of the week passed with the familiar rhythm of 12-hour shifts, cold coffee, and too little sleep, yet something inside me had quietly changed. Every evening, as I walked through the emergency department, I caught myself glancing toward the entrance without meaning to. I told myself it was simple curiosity. Patients often lingered in a nurse's memory for a few days before life moved on. That explanation felt reasonable enough until Thursday afternoon, when a large arrangement of white lilies appeared at the nurse's station with a handwritten card tucked between the flowers. My coworkers gathered around immediately. "Claire," Emily called across the room, "I think somebody likes you." My face warmed before I even reached the counter. I pulled the small envelope free and unfolded the cream-colored card. The handwriting was neat and deliberate. "Thank you for treating me like a person before you knew my name. Please share these with the entire staff. Adrian." No expensive jewelry. No invitation. No phone number. Just flowers for everyone in the department. Emily read over my shoulder and raised an eyebrow. "That is surprisingly thoughtful." I looked at the dozens of white blossoms filling the room with a gentle fragrance. "He said they were for the staff." "Yes," she replied with a grin. "But the note was addressed to you." Before I could argue, another trauma call pulled us back to work. Hospitals had a way of reminding everyone that emotions could wait while patients could not. Hours disappeared beneath the steady rhythm of medication rounds, admissions, and discharge paperwork. By the time my shift finally ended, the flowers still stood on the counter, brightening an otherwise ordinary hallway. As I stepped outside into the cool evening air, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it. Curiosity won. "Hello? Good evening, Miss Bennett." The voice was calm and unmistakable. "Vincent. I hope I am not interrupting your drive home." I stopped beside my car. "No. Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine. Mr. Romano asked me to thank your department once more." "The flowers arrived?" "They did. Everyone appreciated them." There was a brief pause before he spoke again. "There is also a charity gala next Friday benefiting the Children's Hope Medical Foundation. Mr. Romano wondered whether you might consider attending as our guest." I laughed softly, convinced there had been some misunderstanding. "I think you have the wrong Claire." "No, Miss Bennett. I assure you that I do not." I leaned against my car, searching for the right words. "I am a nurse who owns exactly one formal dress, and I am fairly certain it has been hiding in my closet since nursing school graduation." Vincent chuckled quietly. "Then it has waited patiently for the proper evening." His answer caught me completely off guard. "Please tell Mr. Romano I appreciate the invitation, but I do not belong at events like that." Vincent did not argue. "Very well. I will give him your answer." The call ended politely, leaving me standing beneath the fading sunlight with my keys still in my hand. I climbed into my Honda, started the engine, and pulled onto the road, convinced the strange chapter had finally closed. Less than 5 minutes later, traffic slowed near a city park where volunteers were setting up tents for a weekend children's health fair. A large banner stretched across the entrance. "Sponsored by the Romano Children's Hope Foundation." I stared at the sign as cars rolled slowly past. The same foundation Lily had mentioned. The same name the news insisted I should fear. For the first time, I began to wonder whether someone had worked very hard to make sure the world saw only one side of Adrian Romano's story. I tried to forget the invitation over the next several days. Life gave me plenty of opportunities. 2 back-to-back overnight shifts. An overflowing emergency department. A broken vending machine that somehow became the biggest crisis during 3 o'clock in the morning. Yet every time I walked past the fading white lilies at the nurse's station, I remembered the careful handwriting on that simple card. It would have been easier if Adrian had behaved the way the news described him. It would have been easier to dismiss everything as manipulation. Instead, every personal encounter contradicted every public headline. Friday arrived with unusually warm spring weather. Sunlight poured through the hospital windows, filling the corridors with golden light that made even the old tile floors look welcoming. I was halfway through documenting discharge instructions when Emily appeared beside me carrying her phone. "Do not be mad," she said. "But I looked up that charity gala." I sighed. "Emily. Just listen." She turned the screen toward me. Photographs from previous years filled the display. Families. Children holding oversized checks for pediatric hospitals. Volunteers serving meals. Doctors receiving research grants. There were no glamorous celebrity photographs dominating the event. Most of the pictures featured smiling children wearing hospital bracelets. "That does not look like what I expected either," she admitted quietly. I stared at one photograph longer than the others. Adrian stood near the back of the room instead of center stage, kneeling beside a little girl proudly showing him a handmade thank you card. No cameras seemed focused on him. If anything, he appeared to be avoiding attention entirely. "Sometimes people are more complicated than the headlines," Emily said before returning to her patients. Her words lingered with me for the rest of the afternoon. My shift ended just after 5 o'clock. I changed into jeans and a light sweater, planning nothing more exciting than grocery shopping before going home. As I stepped outside, a familiar black SUV waited near the employee entrance. Vincent stood beside the passenger door, hands folded politely in front of him. He smiled when he saw me. "Good evening, Miss Bennett." I walked toward him cautiously. "Please tell me this is a coincidence." "I am afraid it is not." His honesty made me laugh despite myself. "Mr. Romano asked only one thing of me. If you declined before seeing what tonight truly represents, I should invite you one final time." I looked at the neatly pressed suit, the waiting vehicle, then back toward my aging Honda parked 3 rows away. "Vincent, I am not dressed for a formal gala." He nodded as though expecting the objection. "Neither is Mr. Romano." My eyebrows lifted. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, he opened the rear passenger door. Inside rested 2 large paper bags covered with colorful drawings obviously made by children. One read "Thank you nurses" in bright blue marker. Another showed stick figures holding balloons beneath a smiling sun. "The gala begins with a visit to the Children's Hope Center," Vincent explained. "Mr. Romano has never missed it. He believes the children deserve his time long before the donors receive his attention." I looked at the handmade cards for several quiet seconds. They carried the unmistakable uneven handwriting of young patients. Nothing about them felt staged. Nothing felt expensive. They were simply grateful. I slowly closed the passenger door again without getting inside. I still do not know if I belong there. Vincent smiled gently. "Miss Bennett, sometimes the people who believe they do not belong are exactly the people the children hope will walk through the door." Before I could answer, my phone vibrated inside my pocket. An unknown number. I almost ignored it until I noticed the area code belonged to downtown federal offices. Something told me that answering this call would change everything. I stared at the unfamiliar number for 2 full rings before answering. "Claire Bennett speaking." The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and carefully measured. "Miss Bennett, my name is Daniel Harris. I am with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I would appreciate a few minutes of your time." Every muscle in my body tightened. I glanced instinctively toward Vincent, who remained respectfully several feet away, giving me complete privacy. He could not hear a word of the conversation. "Is something wrong?" I asked. "Not at all. We simply believe you may have encountered an individual connected to an ongoing federal investigation." I already knew who he meant. "I am a nurse," I answered carefully. "I take care of whoever comes through our doors." "Of course. We admire that." His tone remained courteous. We are not asking you to violate patient confidentiality. We would only like to understand your observations as a witness. Witness. The word settled heavily in my chest. I am not sure I have anything useful to offer. Agent Harris paused before speaking again. Miss Bennett, public records show that Adrian Romano specifically requested you for his discharge assessment. That makes you someone we would like to speak with before assumptions become misunderstandings. My heart skipped once. How much did they already know? How did you know that? I asked quietly. Federal investigations involve careful documentation. Nothing more. His answer revealed nothing and everything at the same time. Would tomorrow morning work for you? Neutral location. Coffee. No pressure. I looked toward the waiting SUV. Vincent stood beside it with the patience of someone accustomed to long conversations. He never once checked his watch or interrupted. Somehow that simple courtesy made the decision even harder. I will think about it, I finally answered. That is all I ask, Agent Harris replied. One more thing, Miss Bennett. Yes? People often confuse kindness with innocence. Sometimes they are correct. Sometimes they are not. The line disconnected before I could respond. I lowered the phone slowly, staring at the blank screen reflecting my own uncertain expression. Vincent approached only after I placed the phone back into my pocket. Everything is all right, he asked. I hesitated. The easiest response would have been yes. Instead I nodded without trusting myself to speak. He seemed to recognize that I needed silence more than conversation. During the drive across the city, neither of us said much. Rain clouds drifted across the evening sky, softening the fading sunlight until the buildings glowed beneath a silver haze. 20 minutes later the SUV turned into the driveway of the Children's Hope Center. There were no television cameras. No red carpet. Just children laughing beneath colorful streamers while volunteers arranged tables covered with art supplies and balloons. Before the vehicle had completely stopped, Noah came running across the courtyard wearing a bright blue volunteer shirt 2 sizes too large. Claire, he called with genuine excitement. You came. I smiled despite the weight still pressing on my mind. Adrian stood several yards away helping an elderly volunteer carry folded chairs into the community hall. No photographers followed him. No one applauded. He simply thanked the volunteer with the same quiet respect he had shown every nurse at the hospital. As he noticed me, our eyes met across the courtyard. He smiled warmly, but there was something else in his expression tonight. Relief. Almost as though he had been hoping I would choose to see this part of his world before someone else convinced me it did not exist. Standing there between the laughter of children and the echo of Agent Harris's warning, I realized I had unknowingly stepped into a place where every truth seemed to have 2 completely different versions, and I no longer knew which one deserved my trust. The community hall buzzed with the kind of joyful noise that hospitals rarely heard. Children chased one another between folding tables covered with crayons, puzzles, and handmade crafts while volunteers laughed without checking clocks or pagers. For the first time in weeks, I found myself smiling without effort. Noah immediately claimed my attention, insisting that I help him finish a wooden birdhouse he had started painting. Bright blue streaks already covered half the roof, along with several accidental fingerprints across the sides. It does not have to be perfect, he declared proudly. Birds do not care. I think that is excellent engineering logic, I replied, dipping another brush into white paint. He grinned as though I had just awarded him a trophy. Across the room, Adrian moved quietly from table to table, greeting every volunteer by name. He carried boxes, poured lemonade, tied balloons, and listened patiently whenever a child wanted to tell him an impossibly long story. No one treated him like the most powerful man in the room. They treated him like someone who always showed up. That simple difference stayed with me. Late in the afternoon, an elderly woman accidentally dropped a tray of paper cups near the refreshment table. Before anyone else noticed, Adrian was already kneeling beside her, helping gather the scattered cups with the same calm expression he wore everywhere else. The woman touched his arm affectionately. "You work too hard, young man." Adrian smiled. "You have been saying that for 10 years, Mrs. Wilson." "Because it has been true for 10 years. Their laughter blended naturally into the conversations around them. Nothing about the moment looked rehearsed. It looked familiar. Like family. "You seem surprised," a gentle voice said beside me. I turned to find Lily carrying 2 cups of coffee. She offered one to me before sitting on the nearby bench. "I think I expected something different," I admitted honestly. She nodded. "Most people do." We watched Noah proudly showing his birdhouse to another little boy. "Adrian started funding this center after his parents passed away," Lily said quietly. "He believes children should never lose hope because adults failed them." I looked toward Adrian again. "The news never mentions this place." Lily smiled sadly. "Good deeds are quieter than accusations." Before I could answer, my phone vibrated once more. Another message from an unknown number. I opened it cautiously. There was no greeting. Only a single sentence. "Ask Adrian where Michael Romano disappeared 7 years ago. Then decide whether you trust him." My stomach tightened instantly. Michael Romano. The last name could not be a coincidence. I looked up automatically. Adrian was standing only 20 feet away, helping Noah hang the painted birdhouse from a small maple tree near the playground. Noah laughed as Adrian lifted him just high enough to reach the branch. It was impossible to connect that peaceful image with the cold message glowing on my phone screen. Almost impossible. I quickly locked the phone before anyone noticed my expression. A few moments later Adrian walked over carrying 2 paper cups of apple cider. He handed one to me with an easy smile. "I heard you skipped lunch again." I accepted it automatically. "Your people seem to know everything. Only the things that matter." He looked toward the children filling the playground with laughter. "Thank you for coming today, Claire." I hesitated, the anonymous message echoing inside my mind. "Can I ask you something?" His expression remained open. "Anything." I took a slow breath, feeling the weight of a question that had not even been mine until a few seconds earlier. "Who is Michael Romano?" For the first time since I had met him, the warmth quietly disappeared from Adrian's eyes. Adrian did not answer immediately. The laughter from the playground continued behind us, but it suddenly felt very far away. Noah was showing the newly hung birdhouse to a group of children, completely unaware that a single question had changed the air between us. Adrian lowered his eyes to the paper cup in his hands before looking back at me. "Why are you asking about Michael?" His voice remained calm, yet I could hear a quiet caution that had never been there before. I hesitated. Every instinct told me not to reveal the anonymous message, but hiding it suddenly felt dishonest. "Someone sent me a text a few minutes ago," I admitted. "It said I should ask you where Michael Romano disappeared 7 years ago." Adrian closed his eyes for one brief moment. Not in anger. In sadness. When he opened them again, they looked older somehow. "I wondered when someone would reach you." That answer caught me completely off guard. "You expected this?" He nodded once. "I expected that anyone close to me would eventually become a target for questions." I folded my arms, searching his face. "Then answer mine." He looked toward Noah before speaking. "Michael Romano was my older brother." The words landed with surprising weight. "Was?" Adrian drew a slow breath. 7 years ago he disappeared while investigating financial corruption inside our family's company. The police believed he left the country voluntarily. The newspapers created their own stories. Some people decided I was responsible because I inherited leadership after he vanished. "Were you?" The question escaped before I could soften it. Adrian met my eyes without looking away. "No." There was no dramatic speech. No attempt to persuade me. Just one simple word delivered with absolute certainty. Then why not tell people the truth? A faint smile appeared, filled more with disappointment than amusement. Because the truth requires evidence. I only have grief. Before I could respond, Lily approached quietly and stopped beside us. She looked from Adrian to me, immediately sensing the change in the conversation. Is everything all right? Adrian answered before I could. Claire asked about Michael. Lily's expression fell instantly. She sat beside us without speaking for several seconds. Finally, she reached into her handbag and removed a small, worn photograph. She handed it to me carefully. 3 young men stood together outside what looked like an old family restaurant. One of them was unmistakably Adrian, several years younger and smiling without reservation. Another had to be Michael. They looked remarkably alike. Between them stood a teenage Vincent, grinning broadly with one arm around each brother. Someone had written family first across the bottom in faded blue ink. Michael loved photographs, Lily said softly. He believed every happy memory deserved proof. She looked toward Adrian. The day he disappeared, he was supposed to meet someone who claimed to have documents exposing fraud inside Romano Holdings. He never arrived. Did they ever find him? I asked quietly. Lily shook her head. Not a single answer in 7 years. Adrian stared across the playground where Noah was helping another child paint a small wooden airplane. Some losses do not become easier, he said. You simply become better at carrying them. My phone vibrated again before anyone could speak. Another anonymous message appeared. Do not believe him. Meet Agent Harris tomorrow morning. He has the evidence Adrian will never show you. I slowly locked the screen without responding, but Adrian had already noticed the change in my expression. He did not ask who had contacted me. He simply looked at me with quiet understanding and said, whatever you decide to do next, Claire, promise me only one thing. I waited. Listen to every side before you choose which truth to carry with you. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw 2 completely different versions of Adrian Romano. One was the man described in anonymous messages and television reports, surrounded by suspicion and unanswered questions. The other was the man who remembered every volunteer's name, who let Noah paint blue fingerprints across his shirt without complaining, who thanked nurses instead of demanding special treatment. By sunrise, I realized I could not keep wondering. I needed answers from someone outside his world. The coffee shop agent Daniel Harris had suggested sat across from the federal courthouse, quiet except for the soft hiss of espresso machines and the low murmur of early morning conversations. He stood as I approached, wearing a navy suit without a tie, looking more like a college professor than a federal investigator. Miss Bennett, he said politely. Thank you for coming. I sat across from him, wrapping both hands around a cup of coffee that had already begun to cool. You said you had evidence. He nodded slowly and placed a thin folder on the table between us. Before you look inside, I want to make one thing clear. We are not asking you to dislike Adrian Romano. We are asking you to understand the people surrounding him. That sentence surprised me. I opened the folder. Inside were copies of corporate records, charitable donations, financial audits, and newspaper clippings dating back almost 10 years. Nothing resembled the dramatic revelations I had expected. Instead, there were pages covered with highlighted notes connecting names, companies, and family relationships. Agent Harris pointed to one photograph. Do you recognize him? The man standing beside Adrian looked older, with silver hair and an expensive suit. No. Anthony Romano. Adrian's uncle. Harris slid another document toward me. For years we believed Adrian controlled everything connected to Romano Holdings. Recently we began finding evidence suggesting someone else may have been making decisions behind the scenes. I looked up. Then why investigate Adrian? Harris sighed quietly. Because leadership leaves fingerprints even when responsibility does not. Sometimes the wrong person appears to be holding the wheel. He folded his hands. Tell me honestly. During your time with Adrian, did he ever ask you to lie for him? No. Did he ever pressure you? Never. Harris nodded as though confirming something he already suspected. That is consistent with every civilian interview we have conducted. My confusion only deepened. Then why does everyone keep trying to convince me that I cannot trust him? Harris looked through the coffee shop window toward the courthouse across the street. Because trust changes investigations. People who believe in someone often notice details that investigators miss. Before I could ask another question, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, and for the first time his calm expression hardened. "Excuse me." He answered quietly, listening for nearly 30 seconds without speaking. When the call ended, he looked directly at me. "Miss Bennett, there has been a development." My heartbeat quickened. What happened? Federal agents executed a search warrant at one of Anthony Romano's financial offices early this morning. I stared at him in silence. Did they find something? Harris nodded once. Enough to reopen Michael Romano's disappearance as an active investigation. Every anonymous message. Every warning. Every accusation suddenly felt less certain than they had 24 hours earlier. Harris carefully closed the folder before sliding it back into his briefcase. I cannot discuss the details yet. He stood, preparing to leave. But if this investigation continues where I believe it will, there is a strong possibility that one day you will be asked to testify about the man you met in that hospital room. As I watched him walk toward the courthouse, I finally understood why the witness chair had felt so heavy. My story had never been about choosing between truth and loyalty. It was about discovering that sometimes the two were fighting on the same side. I raised my right hand once more as the courtroom settled into complete silence. Months had passed since the night an ambulance carried Adrian into Mercy General, yet I could still remember the scent of antiseptic, the steady rhythm of heart monitors, and the quiet voice of a stranger thanking me for simply staying. Now every memory felt sharper than the polished wood surrounding me. The prosecutor asked careful questions. My name. My profession. My role in Adrian Romano's medical care. I answered each one clearly, refusing to add more than I knew and refusing to say less than I had witnessed. Then came the question everyone had been waiting for. Miss Bennett, based on your personal interactions, did Mr. Romano ever attempt to influence your testimony or ask you to conceal information from federal authorities? I looked across the courtroom. Adrian met my eyes with the same calm expression he had worn from the beginning. He did not nod. He did not speak. He simply waited for the truth. No, I answered. The room remained silent. The prosecutor continued. Did Mr. Romano ever discourage you from speaking with investigators? No. Did he ever instruct you to lie? Never. Each answer felt lighter than the fear I had carried for months. They were not opinions. They were facts. The defense attorney stood next. Miss Bennett, did Mr. Romano ever tell you to listen only to him? I remembered the conversation outside the Children's Hope Center as clearly as if it had happened that morning. No, I replied. He told me to listen to every side before choosing which truth to carry. I heard quiet movement among the jurors. Someone lowered a pen. Another looked toward Adrian with a different expression than before. The trial continued for several more days. Financial records were examined. Witnesses testified. New evidence connected Anthony Romano to years of hidden fraud that Michael Romano had apparently uncovered before disappearing. Investigators eventually confirmed that Michael had left behind encrypted records exposing the scheme, records that had remained hidden until the recent search of Anthony's offices. The accusations that had followed Adrian for years began to unravel one careful piece at a time. When the verdict finally arrived, no one celebrated. Some wounds were too deep for celebration. Adrian walked out of the courthouse without cameras surrounding him because he had quietly declined every interview. Noah ran toward him the moment they reached the courthouse steps, wrapping both arms around him exactly as he had in the hospital room months earlier. Adrian hugged him tightly before looking over at me. There were no dramatic speeches waiting between us. Only gratitude. I walked down the courthouse steps and stopped beside him. "So," I said with a small smile, "are you finally going to take those few days of rest I prescribed?" He laughed, the same genuine laugh I had first heard beside a hospital bed. "I have learned it is dangerous to ignore your medical advice." Noah grinned between us. "I told you she is always right." We laughed together as the afternoon sunlight warmed the stone steps beneath our feet. For the first time since we met, there were no headlines separating strangers from truth, only ordinary people standing beneath an open sky, grateful another chapter could begin. Looking back now, I understand that love is not proven by perfect people or perfect endings. It is revealed in the quiet choices we make when doubt is louder than certainty. Because the strongest hearts are not the ones that never face judgment. They are the ones that keep choosing truth even when it is the hardest promise to keep.